We will go ahead and get started. We are going to talk about writing your secondary or supplemental essays today. That's what our presentation is about. If anyone has questions after this or during, please feel free to, you can unmute yourself, you can write in the chat box. If there's anyone who's watching the recording of this, feel free to send a follow-up email if there's anything we can clarify. But yeah, we'll go ahead and dive right into it. And I guess just to get started too, if we haven't met before, my name is Melissa. I'm one of the advisors in the Pre-Professional Advising Center. Hopefully, if you are listening in on this, you're getting either in the process of applying to professional school, or you're getting ready to submit your application soon if you haven't already. But yeah, we'll get into it. So just as a general introduction as to like what are secondary essays and applications, for those of you that don't know, or maybe if you haven't received them yet, I know some applications when they open and their deadlines are a little bit later, like occupational therapy, physical therapy, don't open sometimes till middle of summer, versus like PA and med school start opening in like the months of April and May. So if you're not familiar, what are secondary essays or applications? They're additional essay questions that come after you submit the primary application. So if you haven't submitted your primary application yet, the initial one like AMCAS or OTCAS, or the dental is the long one that I can never remember. If you haven't submitted those yet, you probably haven't heard anything from secondary essays yet. If you have already submitted your primary application, you may have already started getting contacted by schools saying, hey, fill out this extra information and send it back to us. That's what the secondary essays are. For people who, so it's called secondary applications, like especially for medical school, but for other types of tracks that you may be on, they might call them secondaries. Some schools just call them supplemental applications, so it totally depends. And in terms of where it shows up on your application might be a little bit different. Medical school, they will, once you submit your primary application, they will send it to you directly. But other people, if you're applying through like a liaison application, like if you're applying to be an occupational therapist, you're applying through OTCAS, those will be when you select the schools that you're applying to. There's a part of the application that says program information, and that shows all the schools you've selected. And when you click on the schools, it'll show you the individual requirements for that particular school. So oftentimes you can find secondary essays, supplemental question essays in that part of the application. So it depends on where you're applying, kind of where it shows up. Generally, this totally depends on the schools you're applying to, because everyone's going to be a little different, but generally those secondary or supplemental essays, they're going to consist of probably 4 to 6 additional questions that you have to answer, most of which are going to be geared towards the specific school you're applying to. Schools will already have all of your basic information. They're going to have your personal statement, your academic history, your experiences, all of that in like a general sense. So these questions a lot of times are geared towards maybe the specific location of the school, the specific mission or the goals of the school. So you can kind of dive a lot more into the details of why you're a good fit for them. But it also totally depends. I have seen some schools have just one additional essay question and that's it. I've seen some of them that I've been looking at a lot of California schools. There's a lot of California medical schools. They have 10 to 13 additional essay questions. They have a lot. So truly it depends where you're applying in terms of how much extra writing you're going to have to be doing. Usually, and I always say usually because there's always exceptions to the rules, but typically, especially for medical school, you'll get secondary essays as long as you meet the minimum requirements for the schools you're applying to. So hopefully we're not applying to any schools where we don't meet those minimum requirements, but generally schools will send secondaries to Almost everyone, as long as you meet that minimum GPA, minimum MCAT or test score, they'll send them out broadly, and then expect you to submit them back if you want to continue on to the next part of the application. So that's usually how it goes, but super important to, of course, always read the requirements. Some schools will send every single, I've seen this happen before, they'll send every person, if you spend money to apply to a school, they will send you some supplemental information or supplemental questions to respond to, and they'll say, hey, if you don't meet these requirements, don't send this back to us. So they kind of put it on you to make the call. Some schools will just not send it to, the location sometimes can be a specific thing. Like there are some schools out there that will say, hey, we only accept people who are from this location. Washington State University in the state of Washington, they're very particular. You have to be from their state. You have to have a childhood address. You have to like meet all these requirements in order to apply there. So schools like that will often say, okay, in order to send this secondary, you have to meet these requirements. So always important to just make sure I'm not wasting money sending a secondary to a school that's just not going to consider me, no matter how good my GPA or my MCAT score is. Always make sure that you're meeting their requirements. Secondaries, super important, of course. Every part of the application is important. But secondaries, I think a lot of people kind of, they rush to get through them and they miss kind of like why they should be spending time and really planning and preparing for them. A reason why secondaries are super important, because it's another way for schools to get to know you, right? They have hundreds, if not thousands of people applying to their program with a limited number of spots to accept students into. So this is another way for your application to stand out, to give more information about who you are, what you care about, why you want to go there. And usually when I see the numbers for a lot of programs and they say, we had this many people apply, we sent out this many secondary applications and we only interviewed this many people, there's usually a really big cutoff between how many secondary applications get sent out versus how many people they interview, right? Like I know for for a lot of medical schools, including our Nevada schools, they only interview about 300 people, right? But they get way more people. They send secondaries to way more people than that. And I would say the same for probably most programs, whether it's dental or physical therapy, whatever it is. So it's a pretty big cut that they make from reviewing what you have written in your secondary or supplemental essays to who do we want to bring in for an interview, because we're only interviewing this many people. So these secondaries can play a really big role to getting you to that next stage in the application process. They're really going to help see schools, like I said before, they have that basic information already. They have your general personal statement. Why do you want to be a dentist? Why do you want to be a doctor? They have your academic history. They have your experiences. But the secondary essays, they're going to be more specific towards the schools you're applying to. So they're going to be asking how you're a good fit for their mission or their goals. And they want to know, like, what is it that you can contribute to our particular student body or our school? So it's a chance to get a lot more specific and show, I'm not just applying to schools to get in somewhere. I'm specifically applying to your school. And here's why I'm a good fit. Here's why I want to go to your school. And of course, I think too, it doesn't seem like it sometimes, or it doesn't feel like it sometimes. But it's a two-way street, right? You want, as the applicant, want to know if this is a school that's going to meet your needs and if this is a place that you are excited about attending, right? So I think learning more based on the questions that they're asking, what you learn about the school through the application process is also another way to find out, is this somewhere you really want to attend? So it does, it's the school wants to know more about you, but you also want to know more about the school. Common secondary questions that I think it's good, even if you haven't received any supplemental questions yet, or maybe you have and you're kind of just thinking, how do I answer these things? it's good to start thinking of what some of these common questions are going to be. A lot of them are going to say, tell us more about maybe it's your clinical experience, your community service and volunteerism, maybe research or any extracurricular. A lot of it is diving into things that you probably have already touched on a little bit in your primary application, but this might ask you to go a little bit deeper. So that's super common for secondaries. Again, with those very program specific questions, how do you fit in with our educational model or what our mission is for this school? Pointing out specific skills that you have or attributes, things that you have or that you've gained over time while gaining clinical experience or doing volunteering, showing more of who you are. What are some of those things that can help us as a school advance our mission? That's pretty common. I've seen some schools ask about, not even necessarily clinical healthcare related things, but tell us who you are as a person. What are some of your hobbies? What are some like non-academic related? What are some of the extracurricular things that you like to do? I've seen that several times. How do you see yourself serving the healthcare needs of wherever the location is, Southern Nevada, California, New Mexico, wherever it is that you're applying? They may want to know more about why do you see yourself here within this state, or serving the unique needs of people from this area. Simply, like, why should we accept you, right? Is there, anything else that you can tell us of like what makes you a good applicant? That's pretty common too. You may, depending on your individual circumstances, there may be extra questions. I know this is pretty common for like medical school applications. Things like if you've had really big gaps in your education, maybe you went to school, took some time off, went and kind of lived your life, came back, graduated years later. They might want to know, like, why did you have gaps in your education? It's not, if any of those things kind of apply to you, it's not going to hurt your application, right? Taking time off or life circumstances happen. I think if you can still show why you're a strong applicant and how any of these barriers or challenges have given you clarity as to why you're pursuing this career, answering these questions is not going to be like, oh, well, I took a gap in education, I'm no longer a competitive applicant. No, they just want to know why. Very similar, if you're a reapplicant, usually schools are going to want to know, what have you done in between this application and last year's? What have you done to improve? That may be, maybe you retook a test, maybe you continued taking classes to improve a GPA, maybe you continued to build your experiences. Most schools are going to want to know, if you are someone who submitted an application already, what have you done to make yourself more competitive this year? And again, it's not bad to talk about how, maybe the first time I took the MCAT, I didn't get a great score, so, took it again, improved. Like, it's not bad to talk about, things that maybe were lacking in an application, if it means you're able to show, here's what I did to get better. I think schools appreciate when people can identify those weak points and use that to improve. So what we talk about a lot when writing secondaries, or really just any kind of piece of writing or interviewing even, you might hear the term a lot called like being a mission fit, a fit for the particular school's mission of where you're applying to. And what does that mean to be someone who fits in with the mission of a particular school? Because that's something you always want to ask yourself, that schools are going to always be going back to, is how does this person fit in with what we are trying to do at this school? And a lot of secondary questions are kind of based around that idea. Really being a mission fit, simply put, it means that you, like your own values, your goals, your interests align with the schools that you're applying to. The hard part of this is a lot of these missions are pretty similar, right? I think, yes, they are all unique. Every school has their own set of values, their own goals. They're serving different types of populations. They're located in different places and they do different things. But a lot of schools value, they're going to say we value diversity, we want to give back to the community, all these different things that sometimes make mission statements blur together. But really, I think even if there's similarities between these mission statements, it's not so much about like each school has to have its own super unique mission. It's about you and finding, okay, well, if that's what schools are interested in, and that's a pretty common theme throughout all the mission statements or the websites that I'm looking at, I really need to think deeply about what I've done in terms of my experiences, my academic performance, and how that aligns with the schools that I'm trying to get into. So it's always kind of about making it about yourself. I know that's a very common thing when I am talking with students. They're like, yeah, but all these missions kind of sound the same. And in some sense they do. But I think that just means, wow, that's probably a really important piece to this profession then. If multiple schools are saying these are the things we value and it's kind of similar school to school, you really want to make sure you can showcase that in your application because multiple schools are going to be looking for it. What your job to be able to answer those secondary questions is, what you want to do is be able to ask yourself, there's three main parts of the application that I feel like we're always talking to students about. Then those are your metrics, your academic performance, your experiences, and then your personal attributes. Like all of that are kind of like the three main points in an application that you can kind of whittle everything down to. To think of yourself fitting in with a school's mission, I think what you need to do is ask yourself all three of those areas, your experiences, your metrics, your attributes, individually, how do those align with a school's mission, right? Your experiences or any of those things outside of the classroom, maybe it's your volunteering, your clinical experience, shadowing, research, whatever you've done experience-wise, and how does that lend itself to being a good fit for the school. Your metrics, GPA and test scores, I feel like that's pretty standard. Hopefully, based on the school's requirements, you're a good fit because you meet the requirements. And you're, not even just meet the minimum, but hopefully you're closer to the average. And then attributes, your personal characteristics. How does that align with the schools you're applying to? Are you someone who is service oriented? Are you research oriented? Like the things that you have done, the skills that you bring to the table, how are you going to contribute to what this school is trying to do? So those are the three areas I think it's really helpful. Reflect back on the things that maybe you've already submitted in your application or that you're about to submit, because that can get you thinking of, what are the individual things I can pull from my application to be really specific about and say, hey, there's this specific part of me or this specific thing that I've done, and that's showing why I'm a good match for this school, because they're also about that. I have a ton of community service because that's something I'm super passionate about, and I've been doing it for a long time, and this is the impact that it's had on me and what I've learned from it. And I'm applying to a school that, goes and serves their community, and students are, maybe they're expected to go do community service, and that's a big value, and it's written all over their website, all the community service oriented things they do. Like that shows that I'm a good fit here. So it's being able to take those specific things about your application and matching it to the different parts of what this school values. There is a helpful resource. So again, we're recording this, but I'll send the slides out afterwards too. There's this YouTube video from the double AMC, which I know is for medical school, but I think it's still helpful for any of the tracks that you're on. It's like an hour long, so it's not like a short video by any means, but it talks about the importance of mission alignment when selecting the schools you're applying to. So especially if you haven't submitted an application yet, this could be a good resource to maybe utilize before you hit the submit button. So more information on being a mission fit, because this is very common too. A lot of people, when we say, hey, are you a good fit for the mission? How do you fit in with this school? So many people want to go and say they want to specifically find, what is the mission? Where on the website does it say, word for word, let me match it. So first, I think it's helpful, find out if a school has a mission statement. If so, what is it? Where did you find it? And what about it stands out to you? Are there any particular words or sentences that you feel like are important or kind of resonate with you? That's number one, right? Just kind of see what information are they putting out about themselves. I'm telling you, like, schools' websites have a ton of information, and I feel like they're really underutilized because there's a lot of information you can find out about a school, just what's on their website, right? You can figure out kind of, it might not specifically be called a mission statement, but anything they're saying about themselves for the public to come and view on a website, that's showing who they are. That's showing what they care about, what they value, the things that they choose to put up there to, get people to want to apply to their program. That's showing what they care about. And so, really diving deep into the schools you're applying to, read through everything on their website and get to know them. That's like a good first step. There is again, this is medical school. So I don't think there's a resource for this for the other tracks. If there is, that would be great. But the double AMC, they've started doing a running list of mission statements for schools. So this link right here takes you to a PDF of all of these mission statements. It is only for MD schools through the double AMC. So there's not, like, the DO schools are not on there. But it's a good place to start, right? Kind of see, like, where are schools at? What do they care about? What are they trying to tell people they care about? Again, I think the school's websites are super underutilized, but that's one thing to know too. It might not be specific. Like, if you're looking for a website of, like, this is where this school's mission statement is going to be listed, it might not be super direct like that. And I feel like in most cases it's not. Most places are not listing on their website, like, quote, here is our mission statement, and then they type it out. Sometimes it's just kind of in a heading. Sometimes they might say these are our values. They might say these are our goals. This is, our purpose. Like, it could be phrased a lot of different ways, but a lot of times it's not explicitly stated. So that's why I think it's good to explore websites as a whole to really get an idea of, okay, it might not specifically be a whole website just called the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine here mission statement. There's a whole page for it, right? It's probably not going to be that, but you can poke around on all the different parts of their websites and find, like, what are they about? What do they participate in? What do their students participate in? And kind of get a feel for, again, the things that they care about. I think it's important to be also creative. If you're like, let me learn about these schools that I'm spending money applying to, what are some other ways aside from their website that I can learn about them, and I can start to feel more of, like, how I can be connected or a good fit for their program. I think social media is helpful. Not every school has it, so it totally depends on if school has a resource or a person running their social media. But many schools do. So if you're ever someone that can find, like, an Instagram of a medical or a dental school or whatever it is, just seeing what it is that they're posting, right? What are they profiling? What are some of the things that they're involved in? What kind of research is coming from that institution, if they're an institution that, does research. Those things I think can be helpful too. I think the other thing too, when you're thinking, how am I a good fit? If I'm answering these secondary questions and I need to show how I'm a good, like, a mission fit, asking yourself, what is it specifically that I like about this school? It has to be more than just, I think, very commonly location, right? Especially for our Nevada schools, I think it's great that people consider your local schools. You should consider your state schools because you're, a very good mission fit, being from the state and everything. But it has to be more than that, right? You can't say, oh, I really want to go to this particular medical school because it's in Nevada and I'm from Nevada, right? Like, unfortunately, there's tons of people who also have that same criteria. So it doesn't really make you unique, right? It doesn't really go in depth and show you why you're a good fit if you're just saying, I'm from here, right? So that's something that you want to be more specific. What is it about this school being in a particular location that makes me a good fit? Go deeper into just those kind of superficial, like, I'm from here, I grew up here, I went to school here, so that's why I'm a good fit. Like, that's a great start. um, but it wants to be a little bit more than that. I think it's also really helpful to ask yourself, if you're trying to think like, what is it about this school that I like? What are some of the healthcare needs of the local community, right? Based on geographic location of the school that you're trying to apply to, who are the people that you will be serving? If you're going to be getting experience in that area, maybe you're going to be working or volunteering at community clinics while you're a student there. Maybe you're going to be going out and doing community service. You're going to be doing rotations in that area. What are those needs? Who are the people there? What are their backgrounds? And what are the common healthcare issues or needs? I think that's a really good way to kind of align your experiences with what you're going to be doing as a student there, and that might make you a good fit. In what ways, what do students do there? Are they involved in extracurriculars? Are they, going out and doing community service? Are they involved in research? Like, what are the things that the students get to do at that particular school? And maybe you have experience doing some of those things, or maybe those are things you want to be doing, and that's why you're a good fit, because it's going to contribute to your own personal goals. If there's anything that sticks out to you about their particular curriculum, like, what is it that they're doing to teach their students, right? Like, what kind of sticks out to you in terms of what their classroom experience is like? What is their learning model? If they have one, do you know what it is and like how that benefits you? That's a good thing to consider. But most importantly, I think it's how do you see yourself contributing to that particular school, taking what you have done, what you know, the skills that you have, and how is that going to benefit the community that you're trying to join, the student body that you're trying to be a part of? Because that's what they want to do too. They want people who are going to advance the mission of their school. Very commonly, secondary or supplemental questions might ask you about challenges or weaknesses. In fact, I saw a secondary today, a school that was asking, tell us about a time that you experienced failure. A lot of people get really nervous with these questions because they don't want to highlight things that have gone wrong, or highlight, things that they've experienced that, resulted in failure, or whatever it may be. But it's not meant to be like a gotcha moment. I think that's the main thing. People think it's supposed to be like you're airing all your dirty laundry, and it's not that. It's really meant to be about your growth. These programs know that any of these careers, dental school, med school, optometry school, they're tough. And like, when you're in that program, you're going to experience failure at some point. And it's not that they care that you failed. They want to know how you can recover. They want to know, what can I do to overcome that challenge or to get past it? So a lot of times when schools are asking about, in secondaries, failures or weaknesses or challenges, it's important to want to focus on the outcome, right? What would I do differently, or what did I learn about myself through this process? Focus on that part, and not so much like, yeah, it's okay to say like, here's a time that I tried to do a project, or I was in a leadership position and ended up things fell through and didn't turn out the way I wanted. It's okay to talk about that stuff, but the important piece is, what did you do as a result of that? Because that's where it shows growth and maturity. So sometimes I always like to bring that up, because sometimes people will get really nervous and say, I don't want to talk about a failure because that's going to make me look bad. It won't make you look bad. They just want to know, do you have resilience really? Super common still too. I've been looking at some of the questions people have sometimes they've already started receiving secondary questions, and there are still COVID questions that a lot of schools are asking about. Some schools have removed them. They had them, last year, the year before. They don't have them this year, but some schools still do. So you might be prepared for that, depending on the schools you're applying for. I think the main thing to consider is, a lot of times these are optional, so you may not have to fill it out if you genuinely don't have anything to say. But I think the main thing to consider is, you can't use COVID as an excuse as to why your application is lacking in certain areas, right? Like, they're not going to want to see oh, well, the reason I have zero clinical experience is because COVID and we weren't allowed to go do anything. Because the admissions committee is probably going to say, well, then maybe you should wait to apply next year and spend this time getting the clinical experience that you don't currently have. Or, oh, COVID interrupted my studying to take the DAT, and because of that, I didn't get a good test score. An admissions committee is probably going to say, hey, maybe you should take a year off, study for the test, come back and apply next year when you do have a stronger score, right? So you can't use it as an excuse as to why there's just things that are not on your application, or, why I got bad grades or anything. You just want to make sure, like, I do still have a strong application by the time I'm applying. Same thing too, like, unfortunately, COVID is not a unique experience because everyone was dealing with it. So many people had their classes interrupted because we all had to go online. People couldn't go and get experiences. So it's also, I think, important to try not to frame it as like a woe is me, I'm the only one that suffered because of this. I had such a hard time, because it's like everyone kind of had a hard time. So it can't really be the excuse, because like everyone was dealing with it. And then my personal favorite, there's very commonly another optional. Is there anything else you would like to share with the admissions committee? Usually optional, and so you don't have to technically fill it out if you don't want to. Not every school will have it. Again, some schools have very much set, these are our secondaries and that's it. But it's super common. I've seen a lot of schools that have this. My personal opinion is take advantage. If there is an optional question, if there is a chance for you to be able to tell an admissions committee why you're a good fit, anything else about your application that hasn't already kind of been stated, or just to really kind of like double down on like, this is a program I'm really excited for and why I want to apply here, and here's, good parts of my application I want to share. I say take advantage and share that, right? I think if we know there's like only a certain amount of people they're going to interview, and this can be my one last chance to sell myself to potentially get that interview, I personally would try and take that chance. The caveat to that is, of course, you don't want to repeat information that is already in the application. That becomes a little bit hard, I think, because there's so much information you've already given. Your personal statement, there's letters of recommendation, your experience list, your description of your experiences, your personal statement. There may have been these other secondary questions that have already gone into more deeply these experiences that, again, are part of your primary application. So I think a lot of people struggle with like, gosh, what else can I possibly say? Because I have literally already said so much in the application, and I don't want to repeat myself. So what else is there? If there's nothing else, you're like, gosh, I don't have anything else to say, I think it's okay to not utilize it. I would just think very hard about, like, before you make that decision, right? Is there really nothing else I can say? Is there really no other like perspective or thing that I want to showcase about myself or my application, the work that I've done? You might have submitted your application for like medical school June 30th. Maybe you don't get a secondary application until middle or end of July. Maybe there's additional experience that you want to highlight that might have not been on that primary application. So you think about it before you ditch those optional questions, because I think they're underutilized in a lot of ways. People are like, oh, I just don't want to do more writing. I've done so much writing already. But it can be like your last chance to like say, really sell yourself as to here's why I want to apply here. And also at the same time, right? Like, again, if you genuinely don't have anything to say, if it's not going to be well written, if it's not going to add anything to your application, I do think it's okay to leave it blank, but just think about it before you submit. Some general tips for writing secondaries. Of course, start early. Some places have already sent out secondaries, or supplemental information is already available. But some schools I know, like, they may have sent emails. I've had students already, they're like, yeah, schools emailed me saying they got my application, but they're not even going to start sending secondaries until like July 20th or whenever the date is for them. So some schools just have not sent secondaries out if you've already applied and haven't heard back from schools. So not to panic. I'm sure they're coming, they're on their way. You'll be very busy soon. But really, really helpful if you start early because it's a lot of writing, especially depending on how many schools you've applied to. Very common for people to apply to like 10 to 15 schools. And if you get 4 to 6 essay questions for each school, that's a lot of writing to have to do in like a limited period of time. So I think it's helpful to get a head start on them if you haven't already. You don't need to wait until the schools to send them. There's places you can go online, websites. I mean, you can just Google, supplemental essay questions for any particular school, or medical school secondary essays, dental school secondary essays, supplemental essays, to get an idea of what those questions might be. They usually stay the same year after year, but they could change. You might not know the exact question until you actually get secondaries, but at least you started the process of reflecting on your experiences and kind of thinking of how you might respond. So definitely start early. Pay attention to deadlines too, because some of them are very, very quick. Some schools might give you like a week or might give you 2 weeks to respond. And then once that deadline's over, it's like, if you haven't responded, that's no longer a school that you're going to be considered for, which is, you don't want to kind of put yourself in that situation. So pay attention to deadlines. I've seen some students, they'll make like an Excel spreadsheet that kind of keeps track of, dates, deadlines, the different questions that are being asked, just to keep it organized. I think that can be helpful. Some schools they might have like a really long like period before you have to turn it in. They might say like 30 days or a month, or just like as soon as possible, where it's not really a deadline. I think it's helpful to still, like, even if it's not an official deadline, give yourself a deadline. The sooner you send them in, the sooner you can advance to that next part of the application process, which is the interview, because you're not going to get an interview until you submit that secondary. So the sooner you do so, like, it's just helpful. So just be aware of deadlines. I would recommend, like, hopefully we're like everywhere we applied to, we're submitting a secondary, because otherwise it's kind of just wasted money. But I would prioritize schools if they have those specific deadlines so you don't miss them, and prioritize your top choice schools just so you're getting them done. Again, hopefully you're doing all of them, but I know every year I feel like sometimes they're like, gosh, there's just so many. I just ended up not doing the secondary for this school because I just didn't have time. So hopefully that's not the case, but I know life happens. And then, of course, this is the not fun part, being prepared to spend money to submit secondaries. Super common for schools. It might be like an additional $50, $75 to submit those extra application pieces, those secondary apps or supplemental apps, which can be a lot, right? It can be, if you've applied to many schools, that can be a couple $100s. I would recommend, if your application had like a fee assistance program, if you qualified for that fee assistance program, sometimes schools will waive the secondary fee. Never hurts to reach out and ask, or they might have things on their website, anything about secondaries, if there's like some sort of fee waiver. But I would, worst case scenario, I'd be prepared to spend some additional money after the application to submit these secondaries. Additional tips. This is a big one because, again, it's really hard after you have spent a lot of time, your personal statement, your experience descriptions, for the medical school application, the most meaningful descriptions. You've already written so much. And so when you get these secondaries, some of them might be asking for similar information. You don't want to repeat the same things that you have already written. If it's already something in your personal statement, your experience description, you don't want like a copy and paste version of it in the secondaries. I think it's okay to provide like different examples, or maybe it is the same experience, but you're talking about it in a different way, or there's like a different specific example from that experience. Like that's totally fine. But you don't want to talk about the exact same thing or the exact same lesson that you learned or the exact same bit of information that's already in your application. I think it is also helpful to review that primary application because, again, it might have been a couple weeks or longer since you've submitted your application from when you get secondaries. So you want to stay consistent with the tone that you've kind of already set. Like what you've been talking about is who you are in your personal statement and in your experience descriptions. Let that carry over into who you are answering these secondaries. So it's helpful to review, and also I think just for the sake of making sure you don't repeat information or just maybe getting new ideas, review what you've already submitted. This is a really big one that I think a lot of people really struggle with. Be sure to answer the question. Like that is something that a lot of people miss because it can be very easy to get sidetracked or want to provide like a lot of unnecessary detail that they kind of forget to go back to, well, what is this question actually trying to get from me? Like, what is the response that I should be giving here? So always be sure to answer the question. I think a good tip for that is when you have those secondary questions, go through and like, if it's either like a hard copy or you're just like highlighting it on like a Word document or something, highlight the part that is actually asking the question, right? Like, what is the specific question? And what is the piece that I need to be answering? So you can always go back, and once you've written your response, go back and read the question and figure out like, okay, this highlighted part, did I answer it? Did I actually answer and give enough information to fully complete this question? That can be helpful. Sometimes I think it's helpful too if a question asks whatever they're asking in the secondary or the supplemental information, word for word, like use that as a first sentence. If they're like, tell me about a challenging experience that you had, my sentence will start with a challenging experience I had is, and that's just a way to get started. Your final product will likely not end up repeating word for word what the question is, but I think that's a good way to get started so that you know you're specifically answering the question. Repeat what's being asked, and then you can revise it so it's not so like cookie cutter, if that makes sense. But I think it's always helpful to go back and make sure, am I answering the question, and am I answering every part of the question too? Because sometimes the question will have like 2 or 3 different parts. Same example. I have this in my mind because I was going over with a student today, talking about, tell us about a time you experienced failure. Number 1, like what was the experience? Number 2, how did you respond? Number 3, what would you do differently? And then I think the 4th part was like, what did you learn about yourself from the experience, right? It had like 4 different parts of, you want to make sure you're answering all 4 of those different parts. So I think that's helpful too. Like when you're reading the initial question, go through and highlight, underline, put it in bold. What are the things that I need to be responding to in this particular prompt? And of course, do not miss deadlines. Again, that's, to me, it's wasted money, which is never fun. So make sure you're staying on top of that. You're being organized about it. Like put different deadlines if you have a planner, or if you use your Google Calendar, or if you have an Excel sheet, or you print something out, put it in your bedroom, and follow it that way. But I think just try and have a system about it helps people stay organized. So that's of course our contact information. So if you have questions, always happy to answer anything. If you get prompts and you're like, gosh, I just maybe I want a second set of eyes on it, that's totally happy to help with that. Sometimes it's hard because I know you'll have a quick turnaround time for some secondaries. So if you're not able to get in time, or maybe if you want to come to drop-in hours, or if you just have other questions about the process of kind of where you're at in terms of applying, please feel free to reach out and let us know. I will also show, so this right here is just an example, this website. I literally just type in medical school secondary essay prompts, and you can go through and see. I'm on the California one right now, but you can click on any particular state and you can read, here's what last year's questions were. Some of them aren't updated for this current year, some of them are. Some schools will just have them on their own website, so you don't have to like go searching for it. I feel like most schools are not trying to keep these prompts a secret. You know, they want people to know them, but if you can't find it anywhere, there's usually, you know, third-party websites. You know, I'm not usually one to advocate for like Student Doctor Network and Reddit, but a lot of times you can find the prompts there too, to at least get you started. But you know, here's just an example of some of them. But yeah, I mean, this is a good example here. This is UNLV. Just last year's question: describe how your background and future goals will contribute to the mission of the UNLV School of Medicine. Right, so asking about both your background and your future goals, you want to make sure to include both pieces of information in order to fully answer the question, right? Also helps to know, like, what is the mission of the UNLV School of Medicine? If I'm to answer this question, I should probably know what that is. So getting an idea in that sense, I think really helps answer those secondaries. But yeah, that's everything that I have. I know we're a small group today, but are there any questions or anything I can answer? Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, if you need anything, reach out, let us know. You know where to find us. But if no other questions or anything, I will go ahead and end the presentation. And again, I'll send these slides out after, and I'll make sure that people have access to the recording too. So if you want to go back and review it, you definitely can. If you have follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. So, but thank you all so much. Hopefully you have a good rest of your day. It's almost Friday, so woohoo. All right, have a good one, everyone.